Tasha?
Y'all, today's case is one of those where the warning signs were there, but when it happens to be from your child, what can you do? Hi everyone, welcome back to True Crime List with me, Alyssa. If you are new, welcome. Glad you could join. This case brought up a lot of headlines and questions about family relationships, conflicting evidence, and if justice was really served. So today we're going to be talking about Judy Hebert, who was born in June of 1952 and was from Amarillo, Texas. But she did not come into this world by herself. She actually had a twin sister, Jody. So we got Judy and Jody. Judy grew up to be an artist and was very skilled in sewing. Now, her and her sister Jody did not have it easy growing up, as their mother, let's just say, was not the kindest woman. And I couldn't find much about their father, but it was said that anytime he would be mentioned, Judy appears to be happy and have a smile on her face. So to me, it sounds like maybe they had a good relationship. I don't know, because I couldn't find much about him. But Judy always desired to have a stable family. Now, Judy and her twin sister Jody were very different, where Judy was more reserved, but still was free-spirited and very nurturing. Jody, on the other hand, took a different path and began to work in the sex industry and kind of lived this life where she didn't want to be strapped down. She wanted to be able to go wherever she wanted and do whatever she wanted. By the time 1972 came along, when Judy and Jody were 20 years old, Jody actually fell pregnant and asked Judy if she could help raise her daughter as her own. This was mainly due to the fact that Jody's lifestyle was preventing her from being a suitable parent, whereas Judy had a stable life and felt as though she could give this child a chance at a good life. Once Jody gave birth to a baby girl who she decided to name Tasha, Judy was very involved with helping to raise Tasha. During this time is when Judy would meet her future husband, Rolf, who was also an artist, and they really hit it off. But most importantly, he was so excited to become a father. He's not only getting into a relationship with Judy, but also accepting the role as essentially Tasha's father. Then around the time Tasha was 5 years old, Judy and her husband decided to adopt her. Now, according to Judy's husband, they didn't just see Tasha as their niece, they saw her as their daughter. They took her in and was raising her as their own, as Jody had requested. As Tasha got older, it was said that she became difficult to raise, like she was just a handful where they always had to be on top of her, and Tasha would always take off with her boyfriend or really anyone she was in cahoots with at the time. Almost like she was showing similar behaviors with how her biological mother was. But to no surprise, Judy and Rolf did everything they could to make sure Tasha had everything she needed to succeed in life. In 2004, Tasha would end up having a baby girl of her own, then went on to marry a man named Todd Stewart, who was not her daughter's father. Fast forward a few years to 2007, Judy then moved to Tri-Cities, Washington after her and her husband divorced. Specifically, Judy moved to Pasco, which is part of the Tri-Cities area, where she bought a home. She was known to be a well-loved woman in her neighborhood and loved to take care of her large flower garden she had in her backyard. She was the type of neighbor that would just wave to everyone that passed by and always greeted people with a "hello, darling" or "hi, sweetie." And I don't know about you, but I can just picture all the sweet ladies growing up that always were soft-spoken and spoke like that. It always made me smile, and I felt like they could do no wrong. You know what I mean? Then in January of 2011, Tasha, her husband Todd, and her baby girl would end up moving in with Judy in Pasco, Washington. Tasha and her husband fell into hard times financially, and it was difficult for them to pay their rent, and Judy just wanted to make sure her granddaughter was safe. So without hesitation, she opened her home to them. Now, this is important to note, but Tasha and her husband had no job and no money upon moving in, but it was said that they would just work odd jobs, but nothing ever really stuck. However, Judy was so happy to have her family near her again, and she was very close with her granddaughter. Neighbors said they were always working in Judy's garden and did everything together. They built this extremely close relationship, and once the granddaughter got to the talking age, she would call Judy her Nana. This leads us to just 2 months later on March 3rd of 2011 when Pasco police received a 911 call from a woman who was asking for help. However, the phone call shortly disconnected. When police went back to re-listen to the phone call, they could hear that at the beginning of the call, it sounded like a gunshot. Then you hear some talking, but police stated the words were, quote, unintelligible, something to the effect of, "Stop, give me that, help." Then the phone call hangs up. When dispatchers called the number back, a woman answered, but it was evident that smoke detectors were going off in the background. And if you've ever had your detectors go off, you know it can be pretty loud. But nevertheless, the woman on the phone claimed that the original 911 call was a mistake and she was just trying to change the smoke detector batteries. Now, despite this woman's claim that everything was fine, that the call was a mistake, the dispatcher followed protocol and had an officer check on the house. When the officer arrived, Tasha answered the door and appeared to be distraught, but told the officer that there was no problem inside. She went on to say she needed to put her dog away so it wouldn't bite him, and said there was something burning on the stove. Tasha then closed the door, leaving the officer outside. A neighbor then approached the officer and claimed that he heard a shot from across the street, then shortly after heard another shot go off. When he peered across the street, probably thinking what the heck is going on, he described seeing the window pulse and shake, then heard the smoke detectors go off to what appeared to be coming from the Hebert's home. The neighbor then tried to call the home but didn't get an answer. When he called a second time, a lady stating to be Natasha answered, who informed the neighbor that the sound he had heard was not a gunshot, but rather something on the stove that had, quote, blown up. This is when the neighbor would go on to tell the officer that 3 people resided in the home, which consisted of 58-year-old Judy, her 37-year-old daughter Tasha, and her 7-year-old granddaughter. The officer then called for backup units. Now, according to documents, when the officer returned back to the house, Tasha came to the front door and said, quote, "She came at me with an axe." When the officer told Tasha what the neighbor had heard, Tasha admitted she had fired shots and did in fact hit the person she fired at. This is when the officer went inside and found a gruesome scene. Firefighters were dispatched to the home at 2:43 p.m. and arrived at the scene 9 minutes later when they found Judy in the hallway, partially lying in a bedroom doorway with a mangled left hand, injury to the back of her head, and a gunshot wound to her chest. They immediately started to use electrodes to help revive Judy, but it was too late. When questioned by police, Tasha stated that she shot her mother in self-defense because her mom was coming at her with a hatchet after they got into a heated argument. Apparently, according to Tasha, this heated argument was over the fact that Judy believed Tasha and her husband were stealing money from her through a debit card Judy had given them to buy food. So instead of only buying groceries, meals, whatever food related, Tasha had used it to buy other unrelated items on several occasions, which allegedly sparked this feud between the two. Where this case took a turn was when police interviewed Judy's 7-year-old granddaughter who was at the home during this attack. According to the little girl, her mother and Nana, so Judy, had been fighting all day long. Then at one point, her mother, Tasha, took her into their bedroom, turned the TV volume all the way up, and told her that she needed to stay in the bedroom. Now, to me, this sounds like Tasha did not want her daughter to hear what was about to go down. This is when the little girl stated she heard a pop. At this point, police said it was obvious that this case is a homicide. So if you can remember, according to Tasha, there was this frantic fight around the house with weapons where her mom is coming at her with a hatchet and Tasha had pulled a gun from somewhere. But it did not take long for investigators to find evidence that discredited her story. First, the police captain stated that when he was walking through the house, it was still very orderly, as if there was no struggle that had occurred. And I don't know about you, but if my mom was coming at me with a hatchet, I would be doing everything I can to use anything I can to defend myself. But I've never been in that situation, so I don't know. But it seemed odd to the captain that the house was basically untouched. Also, Judy was not only holding a cordless phone when she was found, but was also holding a file folder which appeared to have a bullet hole that went through her chest cavity. So she's got a phone on one hand, a file folder on the other. How would she be able to hold a hatchet? Well, when police took a look inside the file folder she was holding, it painted a not so good picture for Tasha, to say the least. It appeared that Judy was holding documents that proved Tasha was indeed stealing from her. It was said that investigators believe that Judy made that phone call to 911 to report that Tasha was stealing from her and wanted her arrested. The final piece of evidence that really dismantled Tasha's account of what happened is that police were able to determine that Judy had been hit in the head with the hatchet after she had already passed away from the gunshot. So prosecutors believe that after Tasha had shot her mother, she wanted to make sure she was really gone, which led her to retrieving the weapon and do all that. But Tasha conveniently placed the hatchet close to her mother's body. That same day of the incident, Tasha was arrested and charged with the murder of her mother, Judy. Now, the relationship between Judy and her daughter, Tasha, really started to unravel when police started speaking to Judy's neighbors and friends. It was learned that Judy was so afraid of her daughter and son-in-law, where she came up with a code word to use if she was ever in danger. Now, during my research, I could not find any reportings from her close ones that she ever had to use this code word before, but it doesn't mean prior to this incident that there was ever a time where Judy felt unsafe. In addition to this, Judy was fully convinced her daughter Tasha had tried to kill her in the weeks before her death. This was partially due to an incident Judy had in the garage on February 20th of 2011, where an 18-gallon bin filled with books and other items fell from the rafters and landed on her. And according to a neighbor, Judy never believed that this bin full of books would have just fell on top of her head willy-nilly, like out of thin air, metaphorically speaking. She fully believed this was the first attempted murder on her. And you guys, I can only imagine what was going on through Judy's mind every time she laid in bed to go to sleep at night. Like, I don't know about you, but if I thought my child was trying to harm me, nevertheless trying to kill me, I don't think I could sleep. That's all I'm going to say there. So to further confirm that this garage incident did in fact happen, police found evidence in the garage where there were patterns of disturbed dust. Not to mention a camera was found in Judy's closet where she had documented the evidence. So to police, they believe Judy was investigating her own crime. A detective on the case even stated in an interview with Oxygen Media, quote, "Judy was talking to us from the grave that this is what happened to her, and she wanted to make sure we knew it," end quote. So just like police, investigators, prosecutors, the public, we all want to know why these types of criminals do what they do. Another term for this is the motive. What motivated Tasha, in this case, to have committed this crime? Well, simply put, it had to do with money. I actually tried looking into this from a statistical standpoint in regards to the average amount of murder cases where the motive is money related, because I feel like I hear this all the time. And it said it could be roughly 20 to 40% of these types of cases where money is the motive, which I feel like is a pretty significant amount, but that's just my unprofessional opinion. Nevertheless, again, it was found that money was Tasha's motive. Now, how did investigators figure this out? Well, it turns out that Judy had actually recently changed her will, leaving her assets to her granddaughter, so Tasha's daughter, and Tasha was trying to change it back. Now, I don't know how all this works, but apparently in order for Tasha to be able to do this, she needed to gain access into Judy's safe. She even went as far as to calling the police just a few days before the murder to ask them what the code was to Judy's safe, but the officer did not know it. And allegedly, Tasha would make another attempt to get into the safe, but was unsuccessful. With this attempt, though, she went as far as planting her phone in the closet where the safe was in an attempt to capture the combination Judy would use to gain access into the safe. And police found out about this because they found the video on Tasha's phone. In regards to Tasha's husband, Todd, he was charged with attempted murder, but would end up being acquitted of the charges at his trial that took place in May of 2013. During Tasha's trial, which occurred 2.5 years after the arrest, Again, she tried to claim self-defense that Judy was coming at her with a hatchet, which led to her shooting Judy. But ultimately, the court rejected her claim. I wanted to see what you would make of this, but when it came to some evidence presented in court, items such as the hatchet, a Smith & Wesson revolver, and cartridge cases were taken in for DNA testing. And it was found that Judy's DNA was found on the blade and the handle of the hatchet, and at least 2 other people's DNA was found on the handle. With the revolver, there was a mix of both Judy and Tasha's DNA, and as far as the cartridge cases, little DNA was found on them, so no DNA profile was able to be determined. In addition, a medical expert testified that there were several prescription drugs in Judy's blood system, which created a clinical phenomenon that can be pretty serious called serotonin syndrome. Now, when I was researching this case and found out about this drug reaction, I was like, no freaking way. I was just going down the rabbit hole a few weeks ago on this diagnosis because I recently got prescribed a migraine medication. And y'all, I do so much research when it comes to medicine because all in all, I hate taking new medication, even if it's over the counter. But anyway, all that's not important. But when I ran into this medical expert's testimony, I had a pretty decent understanding already of what serotonin syndrome is. But if you don't know, according to the Mayo Clinic, serotonin syndrome is a serious drug reaction. It is caused by medications that build up high levels of serotonin in the body. Too much serotonin causes signs and symptoms that can range from mild to severe. Severe serotonin syndrome can cause death if not treated. And there's a lot of symptoms in relation to this diagnosis, but it is a serious condition according to my research. With all that to say, the defense really went all in when it came to Judy's toxicology report. I mean, they even had a retired anesthesiologist come in to speak on how drugs affect a person's brain and behavior. But prosecutors asked if there was some sort of test to see if a person is in fact experiencing this syndrome. And the expert claimed that the drugs alone cannot determine this, but it must be correlated with a person's behavior. A forensic pathologist who performed Judy's autopsy said her cause of death was the gunshot wound to her chest, not the drugs in her system. So nonetheless, after a month-long trial, the jury had 443 items of evidence to consider. After 8.5 hours of jury deliberations, the jury would not only find her guilty of first-degree murder, but also guilty of first-degree attempted murder. The lead prosecutor even spoke to the jurors after the verdict, and it was found that they were very split at first, meaning there wasn't a clear indication of which way they were going to go. However, after reviewing all the evidence once more and comparing notes, they all agreed Tasha was guilty as charged. During Tasha's sentencing, she would get up and give the court a 10 to 15 minute speech where she claimed that she didn't do anything wrong to deserve this fate worse than death, then proceeded to turn to her father, Judy's ex-husband, and started accusing him of lying so she could be locked away for the rest of her life. She then went on and on to basically paint Judy in a bad light, and if it couldn't get any worse, Tasha had the audacity to blame Judy for the shooting that ended her life. On Tasha's account, her mother's drinking, medication use, and mental health problem was the reason for the March 2011 shooting. But you guys, do not forget that after Judy was shot to death, Tasha proceeded to hit her with the hatchet. Okay, moving on. Tasha then went on to claim that Judy had screaming rages and fits and brought up the fact that if Judy really believed Tasha was trying to plot to end her life, why would no one call the cops? But again, the day Judy's life ended, she was literally on the phone with police. I am going to end this here, but Tasha told the court she is forever heartbroken and, quote, "Without their lies and deceit, there is no case against me. I hope that I will get a new trial so that the truth really will come out," end quote. Ultimately, though, the judge denied this request and stated that the defense did not raise any new issues that caused the court to reconsider what was already ruled. The judge then sentenced Tasha to 45 years in prison with a 25-year mandatory minimum that has to be served before the court will even consider release. The prosecution was actually pushing for a 60-year term, which I guess at the time was higher than the 40 to 51-year standard range for the crime she was convicted of. But the defense rebutted and said a more reasonable sentence was bottom of the range, and that is what happened, as she got 45 years. Plus, she was ordered to pay $180,000 for her court-appointed attorneys and defense costs, along with other fines and fees. And I'm sorry, but I don't feel like that is enough time for this heinous of a crime. And from interviews I've watched from a lot of her close friends, they feel the same way. It also seemed like Tasha had a whole lot to say at her sentencing, but for whatever reason, she did not testify in her trial. It was said that Judy's ex-husband shed happy tears when the guilty verdict was read and even pumped his fist in victory. In addition, he made a cell phone call from the courtroom to share the news and stated, quote, "Justice got served better than I had anticipated," end quote. So I'm assuming that he maybe had a thought that she was going to get away with this. I wanted to notate this as well, but there was also aggravating factors included in the verdict that Tasha acted with deliberate cruelty. The crime was within sight and sound of a minor child, and it involved a destructive and foreseeable impact on persons other than the victim. Judy's granddaughter was literally just a short distance away in her room while this attack happened, and I can only imagine what that little girl heard and any traumas that might have come from this situation. It's just unfortunate. And not that Tasha had any decency anyway, but to let your daughter be in the vicinity of this attack, let's not forget that Tasha put her in her room, blared the TV volume, and walked out knowing that her daughter could potentially hear something if the volume was at a lower volume. That's just another type of sick, in my opinion. Now, Tasha begged the judge not to place a restraining order on her for her daughter and pled that she would rather be dead than never see her daughter again, and basically, in my opinion, just kept playing the victim card, stating it's not fair what anyone is doing to her. She only ever had loved her mother, so on and so forth. And if you're wondering about the daughter, she has been in the care of her father, not Tasha's husband, Todd, her actual biological father. His name is Charles Adney. And he even spoke out stating that his daughter and her Nana, so Judy, had a very special relationship, and said that Tasha used their daughter as a tool to get dang near anything she wanted. This really got to me, but at the time, Charles also struggled to explain to his 9-year-old daughter why her mom killed her Nana. And when she asks questions, he has to find ways to answer, and I can only imagine how difficult that must have been. Not to mention, his daughter even struggled with blaming herself for what happened. Like, my heart hurts for her. Now, can you imagine? Judy opened up her home to Tasha and her family. I mean, to the point where she gave her a debit card to get groceries and make sure they were fed. Then just 2 months later, Judy ends up deceased. In my opinion, I believe that when Judy made that phone call to 911 to report Tasha had been stealing from her, it caused Tasha to snap. I do think the resentment was slowly building up when Tasha found out about the will being changed out of her name into her daughter's name, and just like that, she snapped. And I can't help but just feel like Tasha is selfish and only cares about herself. I mean, why was it such a bad thing that Judy was leaving her assets to her granddaughter, Tasha's daughter, where she can be set up in some way? Why is that so bad? I don't know, but I feel like as a mother, I would be more than content if my child has generational something being passed down to them. Then don't even get me started on the irresponsibility of Tasha as a mother who fired shots in a home that her daughter was in. What if there was crossfire that could have hurt her child or worse? And then I think back to how Judy just wanted her granddaughter to be safe. Then Tasha does this with her daughter in the other room. It just shakes me to my core when these innocent children are bystanders in cases like this. It makes me so angry. And luckily, Tasha's daughter made it out of there unharmed. But let's not forget that Judy's life, impact, and story matter. So that is it for today's case. I mean, you guys, what a whirlwind. But please, y'all, be safe out there and have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.